Can people just suddenly and inexplicably engulf in flames? Spontaneous human combustion is a very controversial topic that some people believe in. It's the idea that the human body can just suddenly burst into flames with no external source of ignition. I actually remember a friend at school talking about the human combustion of an elderly woman, and I was really sceptical, but it has stuck in my mind ever since. The case she was talking about may well be the first case that we're about to explore. To this day, there's been more than 200 reported cases around the world, but there's no actual scientific evidence to prove that these cases were definitely spontaneous human combustion. Let's explore 3 different cases which at one point or another had been considered to have potentially been spontaneous human combustion. Our first case still baffles people to this day, 70 years later, with it still holding more questions than answers. Dr. Richard Reeser Jr. visited his mum, Mary Reeser, on the 1st of July 1951. He states that she was wearing her nightgown and had taken 2 sleeping pills with the intention to take 2 more later before bed. He didn't stay very long that evening, but that was the very last time he saw his mum again. The next morning, Mary's next-door neighbour and landlord, Pansy, was woken at 5 a.m. by a dull thud that sounded like a door being closed. She got up and looked outside, but made her way back to bed after seeing nothing suspicious. On her way back to bed, though, she noticed a slight smell of smoke, similar to an overheating electric motor. So she turned off her electric pump in her garage and finally returned to bed. Later at around 6 a.m, Pansy brought her newspaper in from outside, and she thought it was really strange that she couldn't hear her neighbour Mary listening to the radio as Mary always normally did each morning. But she did make note that there was no longer a smell of smoke and nothing else was amiss. Later again that morning, at around 8 a.m, Pansy went to deliver a telegram to Mary. But as she knocked on the door, she noticed the door was unusually warm. After there being no answer, Pansy tried the door handle, which, to her shock, was far too hot to touch. She alerted some painters working across the street, who came to help break into Mary's apartment, while Pansy returned to her own apartment to call the fire department. When the painters finally managed to open the door to Mary's apartment, they were just hit with a puff of hot air. The apartment was just completely full of smoke, but very little flame. The painters walked around the full apartment, later followed by the firefighters. The bed was empty, but appeared to have been slept in with the covers pulled down, but it wasn't until they were exiting the apartment that they noticed the shocking scene. Just laying there, completely on its own, was Mary's left leg, still wearing a black slipper. Next to the leg was a pile of ashes, which contained the springs of a chair, part of Mary's spine, and what is believed to be her skull, which had shrunk to the size of a teacup. 67-year-old Mary Reeser had burned to death while sat in her living room chair in her St. Petersburg, Florida apartment. But what was really strange was the state of her apartment. The top half of the apartment, like the top half of the walls around 4 foot upwards and the ceiling, were covered in a really thin layer of soot, while everything below this point looked completely untouched. Overall, the only things surrounding the scene which had been burned was the partition between the living area and the kitchen, a small section of rug where the chair once sat, and the ceiling directly above the scene was damaged by smoke. The rug was left soaked in a greasy substance, which was later determined to be human fat. Only one of the nearby light switches had melted, and the nearby candles had melted into pools of wax. Even the sheets on the bed only a few feet away still looked pure white. Another little discovery that was taken note of was that the clock in Mary's bedroom had stopped at around 4:20 a.m. Experts had pointed out that a temperature of nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit is required to cremate a body, which completely baffled authorities as a typical fire is only around 1,000 degrees. They also revealed that Mary's skull was more likely to have exploded in those kinds of extreme heat than to have shrunk, making experts think that the roundish object that they discovered may have actually been a different body part. But how could her body get so high in temperature but not extensively damage all of the surroundings? Another abnormality that confused authorities is that there was no reports of fire or smoke during the night, and no foul smell of burning flesh whatsoever, not even later upon entering the home. Experts have said that the foul smell should have been lingering for hours later, especially clinging on to furniture. All sorts of theories started to pour into the police. There was things like Mary had been struck by lightning, others thought that she'd maybe been murdered and cremated off-site, with her ashes then brought back to be found. Another source even claimed to have seen a fireball fly through Mary's open window and hit her. But after 3 weeks of investigating, the FBI ruled out all of these possibilities. They ultimately deemed Mary's death to have been accidental and determined it was due to the wick effect, which is a theory that a person's clothing acts like a wick of a candle, and the body fat essentially feeds the fire while the flames cremate the victim. They believe Mary may have fallen asleep in her chair while smoking, especially having taken the sleeping pills, which caused ash or the lit cigarette to fall onto her nightgown, causing it to catch alight. They claimed that she may have died from smoke inhalation without even realising she was burning. And what about Mary's left leg that survived the blaze? They had a theory for this too. Because Mary would get a stiff leg, she would sit with it extended out, meaning it would have apparently been outside of the fire's range. But despite the FBI's certainty, experts are still sceptical of their conclusion, especially with the lack of foul smell and lack of destruction throughout the rest of the apartment. Crematorium staff have even stated that they continually spray bodies with oil to prolong the required heat for cremation. Once all of the fat within the body is burned, the fire should stop burning. So how did Mary's 175-pound body burn to the extent that it did without additional aid? Mary's family believe that her spirit still lingered following her untimely death, with her grandkids told not to worry and that her spirit is nothing to fear. Our next case takes us to Pennsylvania, where 92-year-old physician Dr. John Irving Bentley had lived. He was last seen on the 4th of December 1966, when his friends were leaving his home at 9 p.m. The following day, meter reader Don Gosnell let himself into John's home with prior permission, as he regularly did the readings on John's meter in his basement. On this particular day, though, Don was distracted by a strange, sickly sweet smell and light blue smoke. He came to notice a neat pile of ash on the floor, about 35 centimetres high, and when he looked up, he saw a hole in the ceiling and the floorboards from above, with red embers surrounding it. Intrigued, Don made his way upstairs to investigate. The light blue smoke was even thicker upstairs in the bedroom and the bathroom, and when entering the bathroom, Don made the grisly discovery. Next to the 2 by 4 foot hole in the bathroom floor was the lower half of John's right leg with a slipper still on. The rest of John's remains had all burned to ash and fell through the hole in the floor. Some sources claim that John's skull was also found, while others claimed that it was only his leg. John's walker was also found over the hole and leaning against the bath. What's strange is that once again the flame stayed confined to one area, burning through the lino flooring but barely scorching the bath right next to it. The rubber tips on the walker were also still intact, even though it was directly above the blaze. A partially burnt bathrobe was also found in the bath. Don ran from John's home all the way back to his work office to seek help from his work colleagues. John had always been an avid smoker, and he actually had a history of setting his clothes alight with the ash falling from his pipe, so it's thought that John may have fallen asleep while smoking in bed, causing his clothing to set alight. He also had a habit of keeping matches in his bathrobe pocket, making investigators believe that as soon as the flames reached these matches, that they just completely engulfed John in flames. When John had finally woken up and noticed that he was on fire, he made his way to the bathroom. The burned flannel shirt found on the floor on the way to the bathroom also supports this theory, while his pipe was found on its stand next to the bed. It's thought that he did try to put the fire out, based on the broken glass that was found in the toilet, but that he soon passed out onto the floor. The lino flooring then set alight, causing the floorboards below and the downstairs ceiling to eventually burn through, and with the cold air below creating a stack effect, keeping the flames burning hot enough to cremate his body. John's death was eventually determined to be caused by asphyxiation and 90% burning of the body. Our final case is actually the most recent of the three, taking place in Galway in Ireland, and is considered to be the first Irish case of spontaneous human combustion. At 3 a.m. on the 22nd December 2010, Tom Mannion was awoken by his neighbour's smoke alarm. Tom had went outside to investigate, to find that heavy smoke was coming from Michael Faherty's home, who was his next door neighbour. Tom knocked on Michael's door, but there was no response, so he knocked on another neighbour's door, and very quickly after, the fire brigade turned up. 76-year-old Michael was found laying on his back with his head closest to the lit fireplace. Just like the other two cases, there was really minimal damage to the surroundings. There was only damage to the ceiling directly above and on the floor where Michael's ashes laid. Tragically, Michael's entire body, including his organs, were that severely burned, it left the coroners with no way of determining his definite cause of death, or the origin or cause of the fire. Authorities state that thorough investigations were carried out, and determined that the lit fire in the fireplace that night was not the cause of death, despite Michael's ashes being found in such close proximity. No traces of accelerants were found, nor was foul play suspected. The coroner actually determined that Michael's cause of death had been spontaneous human combustion. The causes of death for all three of these victims has sparked so much controversy over the years, especially for those who simply don't believe that spontaneous human combustion is real. But what are your thoughts on the mystery behind these three cases? Do you believe that any of these may have actually been spontaneous human combustion? Or are you simply a non-believer too? Let me know if you liked this slightly different topic, something a little less crime-related and more strange and mysterious. Please subscribe so you don't miss any future videos.